Well, the reason why we decided to call a press conference as opposed to just answering questions at the courthouse is that it's been my experience that in these things that you get one call from one agency, an hour later you get another call, and you keep getting the calls and you keep repeating the same thing over and over again. So we thought it'd be best just to have everybody that wanted to ask us questions to be here, and we'll try to get answer any question that you have that we can, of course. You realize that there's some serious charges against Mr. Sullivan, and which he categorically denies, and based on what we know, he's right in denying these charges. And up until now, of course, the reason the charges are there is because somebody else has been doing the investigation, and we haven't had any opportunity at all. But as Mr. Metcalf said earlier, from here on out, we are going to aggressively investigate this case. And because Charlie's he's a lifelong resident here almost, and he's never practiced law anywhere but here, and he's been practicing law for over 50 years, and he's been a very, very successful lawyer. And especially originally in his practice, he does more estate work and divorce work than he does anything else. But he at one time was probably one of the most aggressive criminal defense lawyers in this entire area. I mean, he represented people all the way from Miami up to Jacksonville, and he's had really an ongoing dispute or dislike with the Vero Beach Police Department, because he's tried many cases against them and has been very successful in doing that. So we don't know all the reasons why we're here, but we're going to find out. And I just ask you, before you reach any judgments, to wait until everything's concluded. You know, it's easy sometimes to hear somebody on the street say something about that may dislike him or know a client or somebody's charged with something, and then tell you, well, that I know that guy, he did that, I can believe he did that. But you all know, you've been around long enough to know that the final decision is made in a courtroom, and this may never get that far, but if it does, then that will be the final decision that's made in this case. And that's the only time that you're going to hear Andy or I talk about the facts of the case, because we don't want to try the case in the press, but we want to try to, you know, cooperate with you and let you know what's going on, so you know you have some idea of how the case progresses. But we're not going to, no need to ask us a question about the facts, because we're not going to answer them. And both of us feel honored that Charlie would have enough confidence in us to ask us to represent him in a charge like this. You know, friendship is one thing, but when you know, your reputation and all you've worked for all your life is suddenly thrown in the mix, then friendship goes away. You want somebody that you've got confidence and trust to represent you. And I feel very honored that he feels that Andy and I are competent attorneys to represent him, and Andy can speak to that himself.
Well, I've known Charlie all my life, and I'll tell you this: we've begun our investigation, and I said it earlier. We're going to give him the investigation that he was not afforded by the police before they made a decision. And you know, you hear that term "rustic judgment," and you think, what a cliche. But there's a reason that's become a cliche. And I'm going to tell you, I've never seen a case move this rapidly and this reckless. And Charlie, we've already, and I can't get into details, but we've already come up with a number of items of misinformation that has filtered its way to you guys. And what we're asking everyone to do is just reserve judgment at this time. Let us do what we do. I'm confident in the man I know and the person of Charlie Sullivan, and I know this man, and I know at the end of the day it's going to turn out the way it should. And we're going to defend him aggressively, as we would do in any case, but more so because we know this man and we know what kind of man he is.
Yeah, I've known him 50 years. He was the second lawyer I met in Vero Beach when I came here 52 years ago. First one was John Gould. Anybody got any questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned before that he has the right or he should dispute these charges. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Why so? Do you believe that?
Well, because what says is not true. You know, they say there's two stories to every issue. I don't always agree with that. There could be one story and the truth, or there could be two stories and the truth. But there doesn't always have to be just two stories, because the truth's what counts. And I strongly believe that that these charges are not, they're false, they're not true.
And you mentioned the investigation itself, that you've already found some items that you believe were wrong or maybe too fast. Can you elaborate just a little bit? I know you can't get into too many facts, just a little bit more on the actual investigation itself, how you think maybe it went too fast or it's unfounded?
Well, listen, before you make a decision like this, you dot the I's and cross the T's, and and from my experience, and Mr. Stone is a wealth of experience in these kinds of cases, major cases, those don't happen overnight. And just the sheer how fast this happened, it couldn't have been thorough. And I can tell you, based upon what we know already, it wasn't thorough. And there was a rush. I will correct one thing that's being reported too. The case has been assigned to the 18th Judicial Circuit for prosecution. That does not mean that this case will occur in Brevard County. That just means perhaps a Brevard County state attorney will be assigned to the case. It's too early at this point to even guess as to whether or not that this case will be in Indian River County, but it has not been moved out of this venue at this point.
What they've done is they've assigned a prosecutor to come down here in place of Mr. Colton, but this is still the venue.
How fast did this investigation happen? Are you saying it went too fast? How long are we talking here?
It's not necessarily how many days it went on. It's how much they put into it. But based upon what I've seen so far, it was very cursory at best. And they thought they had what they had. And I can tell you, as things progress, and when you read reports, you get it as you guys do. You're gonna read police reports. Understand that these are brief summaries, that a lot of times opinions of the officers that make the arrest are injected, and that's just human nature. What we're asking everyone to do is to pause and let all the facts come out before anyone passes judgment on anybody, and that's the only thing that's fair.
Mr. Stone, what's the feeling right now for Mr. Sullivan as far as his family and his reputation? Is he embarrassed right now because this is coming?
Sure he is, and his family is too. But his family was there this morning in support, and they're definitely behind him. But naturally, this would embarrass anybody. But they're a close family. They'll stick together, and they'll be behind him 100%, and they'll be right there till the final hour, second, or whatever.
You say these charges are false. Why would a woman come out and say that about him in such detail? What motive is behind that, in your opinion?
Well, you know, motive is always hard to determine. And that's something she'd be best to answer, not me, because I don't know what her motive is, and I really can't speculate on it. You know, Mr. Sullivan has amassed quite a bit of wealth in his practice, and I'm not saying that's a motive, but that's something you can consider as a possible motive in there. But when Mr. Metcalf was talking about rush to judgment, I don't know how many were here when Jerry Lamoth was charged with child pornography on his computer, and they rushed to it and they arrested him immediately because they thought, since he had been a former Catholic priest and it was child pornography, we got our case. And later they found a man who confessed that he was hired to set him up, and broke into his office and went to his computer and did everything on the computer, went into the cache, so it looked like it came in at different days, at different times, and it came in all one day. Now there's a warrant out for that guy. But at first, until they found that guy, they just made a couple of investigations, talked to a couple of people, and charged him and ruined his life forever.
Mr. Stone, you mentioned that Mr. Sullivan's been here many years, prosecuted a lot of cases, and you alluded to maybe some bad blood maybe between the police department and him. Do you think that that's a part of this case at all?
Again, I don't know. I'm just saying there's possibilities, some things that exist, such as the question he asked about the motive. That is there. It exists. Whether or not that's the reason, I can't say. I don't know. But certainly you would consider that and consider the speed of it and consider the parties involved. That could be a reason.
Was there a prior relationship between the woman, the alleged victim, and Mr. Sullivan?
Not to my knowledge, no.
How did he know her? Did she actually work?
She worked in that office.
In that office?
Right.
Okay. So she actually goes into his office on a regular basis for work related?
Well, she didn't actually work for him. She worked for Chuck Sullivan Jr. And what a lot of people don't understand that Mr. Sullivan Sr. and Mr. Sullivan Jr. are not connected in their practice in any way. Mr. Sullivan Sr. is by himself, and Chuck Sullivan, his son, is in with Bobby Guttridge.
But she worked in the same building?
She worked in the same building, and she worked for Bobby Guttridge and Chuck Sullivan.
Why would she have a reason to go into the office, and why allegedly that he called her in there? Why?
Well, again, you'd have to ask her why she went in there, and I don't know that it's been shown by clear and convincing evidence that he called her in there. I mean, again, that's something we'll all determine or find out in the future, but again, that's speculation on somebody's part.
Was there any truth that she had said that she had told his son, and he had spoken to him in the past as far back as last month?
I have no knowledge of that whatsoever.
And what we're doing here is starting to get into some of the facts, and that's exactly what we don't want to necessarily happen up front. Many times law enforcement will do that at the beginning of the case. They will flood the newspapers with accusations, and then later on we're governed by rules of ethics where we're not allowed to argue a case in the press, and that's not the point of this today. But that's what, as members of the media, you need to understand, that charges get laid down every day, and then we have to govern ourselves accordingly and defend people, and we don't necessarily get to make wild accusations that may or may not be sustained later on. So I can just tell you that patience is the order of the day in this case, and we're going to investigate it. I can tell you, just through experience, it's going to be a lot more thorough than what has already been done.
Okay, we're done.
Yeah.
You guys can?
I have a question. Are you pleased that the prosecution of the case is going to be handled by the 18th Circuit and not the 19th?
I have no reason to be more pleased that that happened if this circuit had kept the case.
Okay.
It's what it is, and prosecutors operate with the ethics they have. I don't care who prosecutes it. You can bring in Marcia Clark or whoever.
And what is the status of the employee right now?
I don't know. I have no idea.
You don't know if she's still working?
She's not returned to the office, and that's as far.
That's all we know, because again, she didn't work for Mr. Sullivan.